Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Churchill Club CEO, Karen Tucker.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Karen Tucker, CEO at the Churchill Club, and welcome to our program called The Future of Conversing with Technology. I'd like to welcome our distinguished speakers, Sheryl Connelly from Ford, Ron Kaplan from Nuance, and Steve Wozniak on the end, and Dan Miller next to him. And of course, our moderator, Quentin from the New York Times. Thank you all very much for being here. Within the past year, voice has become central to a rapidly unfolding transformation in how we engage our devices. We think perhaps akin to the way the mouse changed computing. And we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what's ultimately possible. We've invited our speakers here today or this evening to share their perspectives on trends, opportunities, strategies, and where they believe the technologies are headed, looking, say, 5 years down the road. We especially want to thank Nuance for making this program possible. A special nod to Rebecca Paquette and Leslie McHugh. Thank you so much. It's great to see such an amazing audience in the room. We have people here from across the country and around the globe. And I want you to remember, please, that you are the reason that we are presenting this program. So if there is a topic of interest to you that doesn't get covered during the onstage portion, there will be Q&A approximately the last 30 minutes starting at about 8 o'clock. There will be microphones in the room, and you can raise your hand and ask for the microphone and bring that topic up. Our next program is a breakfast program later this week on Thursday, August 23rd, called Once Upon a Time, The Future of Storytelling in the Age of Big Data. That program is in Mountain View. And next, on August 29, we're proud to present SAP co-CEO Bill McDermott in conversation with Jeffrey Moore of Crossing the Chasm fame. SAP looks to be quite on the upswing, so expect a fascinating conversation. And we also have a remarkable set of programs for you on Thursday, September 13. First, a day-long event called Changing the Game, co-designed by IDEO as part of the curatorial team. You'll be able to hear an amazing group of speakers talking about change and innovation. And you'll also have spectacular opportunities to experience a wide variety of processes for surfacing innovative ideas. There'll be a lot of value to share with your teams. And that same evening, you can catch the Churchill Awards, which is a program designed to inspire others by highlighting excellence in 4 areas that I think all of us care about: innovation, leadership, collaboration, and societal benefit. You can see me afterward for the insider scoop on who we're going to be honoring. Be sure and mark your calendars. These programs fall into the do not miss category. They will both be held in Santa Clara. If you are tweeting, please use hashtag Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter codes in your printed program. So let's now introduce our moderator, Quentin Hardy. Quentin is Deputy Technology Editor at the New York Times, where he writes about computing and society for the Paper and the Bits blog. He also teaches at the iSchool at UC Berkeley, and he has an illustrious past as a journalist, having spent a decade at Forbes and over a dozen years at the Wall Street Journal. And he says it's the best ever career. He gets paid to find out about the world and tell people what he finds. And some of you no doubt know that he also has quite a reputation for his wit. Do yourself a favor and follow him on Twitter, and you'll see exactly what I mean. And we're always honored to have him back to our stage. Please give your warmest welcome to Quentin Hardy.
Oh. Thank you so much for the welcome, Karen, and thank you all for showing up. It's a great turnout tonight. The history of our relationship to computers could be seen as a kind of history of increasing intimacy. At first, we are compelled to behave like the machine with punch cards. But as it evolves, we come to the command line and keyboards. And so we're typing against the machine. and then the mouse and drop-downs, and we come even closer and closer to the computer. And through design, we develop a level of being understood by the machine that in some ways psychologically changes our relationship to it and reflects the greater flexibility and capability we feel with the computer. More recently, touch has brought us even closer to the computer, where we're manipulating how the computing is taking place and feel even more understood by the machine itself. It responds to what we're doing with it. The greatest step of all may be the one we're talking about tonight, however, which is voice. That our breath itself will affect the machine, and almost miraculously, the machine will speak back with us. I said in the days of punch cards, we acted like the machine. Now the machine acts somewhat like us, and hopefully, increasingly, understands and anticipates our desires. This will lead to a certain level of ambiguity and confusion, some of which will be kind of interesting to exploit. We'll manage, but there'll be a lot of discovery along the way. Now, along with a lot of other effects of Moore's law, this enables a whole new relationship with computers at a time when computers are percolating into every device known and will be in devices we have yet to imagine, and hooked into a cloud of hundreds and thousands, nay, millions of servers around the world for an even more muscular relationship with machine intelligence that leads us to a kind of situation where each of us simply assumes we have access through touch, voice, keyboard, what have you, at any given moment through any number of devices with a nearly infinite amount of storage, a nearly infinite amount of compute, and the capability to communicate through translation with any number of 4, 5 billion people in the world at once. I'm speaking there as a kind of visible, somewhat distant, but visible shift in civilization, the likes of which we can only understand as we interact with it over the next decade. And voice is critical to this. And I hope tonight to talk a little bit with our panel about where voice will take us and what form this will take, and how this industrial landscape will also take shape. Now, wishes will be granted all over the place. We see this voice now interacting in mobile phones, in televisions, in cars. Ford has driven a car into the hotel as evidence of some sort. We'll join desktops as part of the computing world. And other objects also will come online. And direct translation will become easier so that man, machine, man, woman, what have you, takes place in a much more accelerated way, nearly instantaneous. Wishes are granted across cultures and languages and across machines. It's very, very exciting. A lot of business has anticipated this already. Scansoft bought out the bankruptcy of Lerner and Houseby to buy Dragon and turn itself into Nuance, really transform the company, and become from a optical recognition scanning company into a kind of voice company, the evolution of which we'll discuss a bit and where it's going. Microsoft paid $800 million for TellMe. I assume Google has thrown some similar amount of talent and compute at various projects that are now being expressed inside Android. They just announced some other advances at their engineering conference in June. And now Apple, with Siri and other investments, is coming onto that game as well. This is a very exciting multi-billion-dollar enterprise among giants, and also creating opportunities for all sorts of startups inside that landscape. Some of you are from those companies I described, and I hope you'll participate in the Q&A that we will hold after our approximate 50 minutes to 1 hour conversation. But for all of this engineering and all of the miracles I just promised, voice recognition can also be seen as a very mixed bag. Not least because it's a human event, and all human events are mixed bags. There's good and bad, and it's up to us to make the good from it. But inherent as well is the idea that the industry is overpromising and perhaps falling short. What will it mean for our voices to be captured? Who will own our voices? Who will own the air we breathe and communicate with? What does it mean for security and surveillance as voice is used as a means of identification, perhaps even financial transaction? What does it mean for us when we have a greater sense of intimacy with our machines? I spoke of the mouse giving a greater sense of action. Now you'll start assuming these things understand you on a kind of massive, deep psychological level. And close to the hearts of many people here, how disruptive will this? Who might be disrupted absolutely? Who might be advantaged by this? And what might take shape overall inside the industry as a result of this transition in a new kind of computing? Well, here to sort through all that in 50 short minutes, I'm joined by Sheryl Connelly, who's involved with global trends and forecasting at Ford, Ron Kaplan, a senior director at Nuance, Dan Miller of Opus Research, and Steve Wozniak. I didn't get straight. What is it you do? If you don't know him, you haven't been paying attention. But let's just start out working down the line, and then we'll proceed to a conversation. Sheryl, I'll start with you. Talk a little bit about what you are and your bio a bit, but more to the point, that world I sketched out, how much of that was moonshine and industrial fluff, and how much of that do you think is real? And what is the important thing that's taking place inside voice now?
So I'm Sheryl Connelly, and I'm with Ford Motor Company. I'm basically the in-house futurist. My point of view comes from one of consumer insight. What drives us? I look at consumer trends through the lens of social, technological, economic, environmental, and political arenas, and try to understand the landscape and how things are going to unfold, and how we as an innovator of automobiles can be on the leading edge of that. In terms of voice, my thought of it is one of versus supply versus demand. I hear a lot of talk about the innovation and where we're going, but it all seems to be driven by the supply side. I'm much more interested in the demand side. Why do we as consumers want this information? What does it do for us? Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And when I break it down fundamentally, I think technology is only as good as its accessibility, and voice is just one more mechanism to make technology that much more accessible. But at the heart of it, what do we as the end user get out of it? Well, from a trend standpoint, we refer to this as information addiction. We believe having information at your fingertips, delivered in a just-in-time fashion, provides great benefit. One of those benefits is that it provides you more opportunities. It presents you with more options. You're more likely to influence the world around you. You are allowed to act more spontaneously. And if you culminate all of these things together in the aggregate, it can actually influence your wealth, your power, your control, your success. And if this proves to be true in modern times, our desire for this just-in-time information will grow and grow to the point that it indeed might actually become insatiable. And this concept isn't new to anyone in this room. That's why we refer to our BlackBerries as our crackberry. I mean, we have become so dependent on this flow of information, some people actually refer to it as online oxygen. So that when we're without, we feel deprived of a major life force. So I want to know, what are the drivers behind that, and will this stay? Are they strong enough to keep this alive? Will this demand grow or fade in the marketplace? And I believe it'll grow. I believe it'll grow for the following reasons. Here are the fundamental drivers. One is that we live in a marketplace that requires greater scrutiny. The mistrust in business, government, media has never been stronger. And so we as consumers, the idea of let the buyer beware has never been stronger. The onus is on us to scrutinize the world around us. And these handheld, just-in-time information allows us to do that. Secondly, it deals with a sense of time poverty. The idea that there are not enough hours in a day are not new. I mean, you can find journals that are 200, 300 years old that say not enough hours in the day to accomplish everything I want to do. But it's acutely different in modern times because of these digital devices. And I think there's a great irony that these devices were sold to us as time savers. They're going to be efficiency. And instead, they engage us in ways that we've never imagined. The boundary between work and play has never been more blurred. But having these handheld devices allow greater spontaneity. It allows us to manage our time in the context of time poverty. The third, and I think probably one of the most powerful drivers for the Western or developed world, is that information has become the new status symbol. In the wake of the recession and conspicuous consumption falling out of favor, ostentatious displays of wealth have really become quite weary of, in the marketplace. We don't aspire to that. But having information, being recognized as a go-to resource among your friends, your family, and colleagues, that's the new clout. That's where the cachet falls, and that's where these digital devices enable this. Now, the fourth driver is probably the most intriguing, but the one that I understand, that is the least understood. And this is the emergence of new science that talks about the physiological effects of getting new information. That the body actually craves information. It releases chemicals from your brain that are akin to the kind of chemicals that it releases when you receive a reward. So our appetite for information will continue to grow. And voice is an avenue that I think will extend the breadth and the depth in which we can go into this information.
So it's a manifestation of our desire for speed of information. It increases the velocity, and therefore it will proceed. We'll find ways of...
But I don't think it's just velocity. I think that it's breadth, it's depth, it's context. It's about getting the right information at the right time, in the right place, from the right source. Mm-hmm. I think the frustration with technology, and this encompasses voice, is when you want a piece of technology to do something and you ask for B and it delivers X. You know, and the advances that we see from companies like Nuance is that they're engaging technology through a natural conversation tone, a real dialogue, that we no longer have to change the way that we converse. The way that I converse with a colleague is the same way I can now converse with this technological advice.
Okay, so Ron, you've been looking at this since the 70s, right?
Long time.
How much of what I talked about were they promising in the 70s?
Well, promising? Most, probably.
Right.
That was
you
easy.
feel like we're closer?
That was easy. That was easy. No, I do
Handicap
actually.
how it's going.
So I started my career in the early 70s at Xerox PARC.
Yeah.
And we saw that computing was going to get personal. It hadn't been really up to that point. It was going to be used by ordinary people in ordinary situations. And moreover, computing was going to deliver an increasingly complex and diverse array of features and capabilities. And I think that's kind of the crucial thing in here, which is complexity. Because there's a danger in that, and we also saw the danger. You know, and this is kind of what happens when you have kind of an engineering activity, a bunch of engineers actually going out and building all the things that they can build. You have all this wonderful available technology, and it's not accessible. That is, ordinary people can't remember how to do it. If they remember, they can't execute whatever the commands and controls are that go along with that technology. So the danger is that you create a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of features, a whole bunch of information, whatever it is, and the sheer complexity of dealing with it overwhelms any utility that comes with it. So we saw that as a major issue. How do you create the illusion of simplicity in a really, really complex set of offerings, information, and so forth? For ordinary people, not for experts that have been trained how to do, 10,000 hours, to make an expert at something. So there were two prongs of research at PARC, trying to create the illusion of simplicity. One was the windows, the mouse, the icons, what we now know as the GUI. And that was pretty easy to do, roughly. I mean, it took only about 10 years before it showed up on the Mac and kind of became cost-effective and affordable for lots of ordinary people who love the Mac. And it actually organized information in a way that took out a lot of the complexity. You could put an array on the screen, you have drop-down menus, some choices, and the point-and-click metaphor basically meant you didn't have to do all those command lines. You only had to think about these sort of pixels, these icons on the screen that represented the things that you wanted to operate on. So that was pretty successful, and we're still pretty much living with it. The second prong is what I'm going to call the conversational user interface, the CUI. And the goal there was to allow users to use ordinary language to describe the information that they need, or the actions that they want to perform. And I think that's sort of The action side is something that I think you didn't kind of mention in your discussion, but that's the other side of getting information and causing things to happen, kind of command and control in a natural and easy to specify way. And that's what conversation is, getting things to happen much like by using language, much as you would with a personal assistant or a friend, in the days when friend had a meaning of somebody that you would actually know. So I remember, yeah, actually, this maybe dates me. I remember those days. So I think that the GUI was really, really good for about maybe 20 or 30 years. And it's kind of getting overloaded now. It's not functioning as well as it used to. I mean, you've all had the experience of, a page comes up and there are 45,000 things on the page, and you're looking for the one, the coffee that's going to be ground and not beans or something like that. And you're just scanning the whole page, and you can't find it. You'd like to just be able to say, I want to order some ground coffee.
Well, you're talking about speech recognition that's beyond simply obeying commands and trying to understand intentions.
That's right.
Is that something that really exists
So this
now?
is what the conversational user interface is, and it goes back to the point that you made. It's understanding what I want by what I say. When I don't actually say everything, a lot of it goes in an ordinary dialogue and an ordinary conversation. Most of the information that transpires gets communicated without actually verbalizing.
And how far along do you think that level of understanding is?
Well, let's see. About 5 years ago, I made a prediction that it would be, I tended to calibrate these things in terms of the age of the system that you're talking to. Is it a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and so forth. I think 5 years ago, we were talking to, or actually 7 years ago when I made this prediction, we were talking to 1-year-olds. It was very tedious, and not much happened.
Yeah.
So I think we've moved through the 2, maybe we're kind of getting towards the 5 or 6.
That's
maybe the conversation's getting kind of interesting, and maybe good things are happening. And these conversational user interfaces don't need to be perfect. And I think that's an important point here, that perfection is not required. They just need to be good enough so that you feel comfortable in being able to get the effect that you want in an easy and natural way. I mean, I probably only understand about 80% of what my wife says to me.
So really high average.
Well, we've been working on it for a long time, so 80%, and still the garbage gets taken out.
Yeah, right.
Eventually.
Yeah. So the machine, sort of 5 years old, it's out of diapers in that point. So
it's out of diapers, and it's not even in the terrible twos. It's not actually saying no to everything.
Right. So soon it will start working and playing with others and sharing its toys.
Yeah.
That'll be nice.
Yeah, throwing sand.
Let's move down the line. So Dan, you talk to a lot of companies. Right. Why are they all getting into this? What do they want? What do you think they're going to build that's going to work?
Well, to sort of paraphrase what Ron said, there's just a lot of hope tied in there. And actually, I would say that we put an umbrella around what we cover and call it conversational commerce, and it's really trying to describe the technologies that help people talk to other people more effectively, people talk to machines more effectively, and then the machine-to-machine interactions that have to take place in order for these things to happen with low latencies and greater efficiency. And it's just, it's gotten much better. It's not like you're talking to a 5-year-old. There are gaps, though, and the companies that, I've had the privilege to be hanging around at the top of the Silicon Valley for 29 years now, but in the past 8 or 9 years, there are opportunistic firms that have come along and seen certain deficiencies in how either spoken words or gestures or what you do from thought to action are not being recognized and not being acted on. And then we're in the world of mashups and where there's a lot of developers' energy out there that are looking at RESTful interfaces that are starting to see speech vocabularies and things that a computer can recognize that are on a par with what they had been thinking about back in the 7 years ago or whatever, when we were thinking it should all be really easy. I used to call it recombinant communications, because I think we're building a better world out of found objects that were done when we moved from client-server to the web and built better ways to interact with the pointers, with the mouse, with the icons. But it was simplified, and now we have even easier ways for people to bring developers to bring their collective energy together and see an object, make a car more personal, make a website react to more ways to communicate with it. And we've moved along sort of a maturity path where anything that you could do through a website, the people's expectation of what they can do with today's technologies, and this gets to your point, creates its own demand. And then these unexpected, energetic, imaginative people can come and try to fulfill that. And we're seeing that in an unprecedented sort of way.
Steve, you're a great design guy. Do you like this interface?
Actually, especially going through Apple's history, the design of computers that are easy to use, that work in the way that's natural to people, is very deep to my heart. We had a gentleman named Jeff Raskin that came and talked to Steve and I right in the garage. And he told us, look, you're building these machines, and you can build machines that have all these commands and do functions for people, but if you put extra software in, you can make them so easy that someone who doesn't know, is not a computer expert, can come up and just use the machines, find the ways to get things done. Your manual's very short, and that basically you put in the software to make the machine work in common, understood human ways, rather than making the human structure all their thinking to remember everything about how to use that complex world. And this was back in the days of the Apple II. And the Apple II took a very human step of making a computer the size that a person could actually use and have and feel they own. And it's this personal feeling that things are like the way I want them. It's very much this want that's so important. It wasn't really important in older years. Technologies like chips and all, they were developed for the people who could afford the new technologies, the military, the governments, the big enterprises. The most wonderful gadget in my life was my little transistor radio when I was 8 years old. And I held it, and I loved this device. 6 transistors. And I got to see they were going to make a chip for the first time with 6 transistors. And I went to my dad and I said, wow, now we're going to have better transistor radios, right? And he said, no, these chips are only affordable by the military for rockets that need to save a fraction of a gram here and there. Right. And what drops out years and years later is what people get. And I felt, darn, what I'm just the average guy in the average home has needs and wants and devices that make life nice. And I wanted that to be ruling the technology development of the world. Here we are. Now it's the consumer products that are causing the technology to be developed that the enterprise is taking advantage of, the military, NASA, the governments. So it's come full circle. So that's why we want to look at consumer needs and devices, and that's that human element. When we moved towards the GUI computer, after we went down to Park, it was because the human eye sees 2 dimensions, but a keyboard was only 1 dimension. We were not taking advantage of the eye that a person has. We weren't looking at the computers before that just weren't taking into account what a human is matters. We called the screen a desktop because human beings had desktops. They were familiar with it. It was a familiar term. They knew what to do when they got in that world, and that made the products much more productive to people. As we get to touch now, I'm noticing that the devices are becoming more like little people. We've heard some talk like that because they have the senses a human being has. Like if you want to grab me, you tap me, you touch me. If I want some attention on my iPhone, I tap it. If it has the sense of touch, it has hearing. I can speak to it. That's a natural thing a human being does. Speech has this advantage of being very robust. The way we speak to each other. I could say things with the wrong words, I could stutter, I could back up and correct myself, you'll understand me. I can say things even wrongly, use a phrase out of place, you know. It's like the iron on the skittle or something. Something that doesn't make any sense. And you might understand me depending on our context. Speech is very robust. And robust I was taught when I was studying inferential statistics, statistics, which is like controlled experiments.
Yeah.
And we make a bunch of assumptions like, oh, the proper number to use for the standard deviation will be the average of all the test groups. And it turns out that that's not accurate, but little differences in the mistakes that you've made don't matter very much in the end result. That's robustness. A lot of, you know, you can say things many ways and be understood. And I think that's where speech in our computers is heading.
Well, that's a ton of love for speech, but we might as well just get to it. About a month ago, I think, in a newspaper in Albany, New York, you said that Apple's Siri was poo-poo. And I don't think you were referring to the delicious Chinese appetizer.
Yeah, I didn't say it the way you say it here at all.
Yeah.
But I said there are disappointments with it because I said Siri had come into my life. And it brought me to where I could say I'd like a reservation for 4 people at 6 p.m. Wednesday night at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and it would get it, and I'd just hit confirm. This was before Apple owned Siri. Yeah. The day Apple bought Siri, you know, and I was in Tahoe with my wife, and I said, we wanted to know, is this the largest lake in California? Difficult question, you know? And I explored on Google, typing things in, following structured procedure that I hate, for 20 minutes, getting articles about Lake Tahoe, articles about California, and no list. I said to Siri, I said, let's try Siri as a joke. I went to Siri, which was an app not owned by Apple yet, and I said, what are the 5 largest lakes in California? You know, and it was Salton Sea in North, and Tahoe was 3rd, and Clear Lake was 5th, and what? I said, whoa. Can it do mathematics? I didn't expect it to do that sort of thing.
Wow.
I tried Siri and I said, what are the prime numbers greater than 87? 89 started the list. It gave a list starting with that, crediting Wolfram Alpha. Somehow using the phrases greater than, it knew it was a relationship. And Wolfram Alpha is the database for relationship stuff. 5 largest is a relationship. It understood me the way I thought.
You've just recapitulated everybody on here. That's her immediacy, that's his expectation, creating a demand that you would use this more. I mean, it was living that way. So what do you think slowed down?
Also, I get back to your idea of love, too, or somebody mentioned it. A lot of us love our computers. In the Apple world, when it was Apple's and Microsoft, everybody who had an Apple loved it. They just spoke of it that way. Everybody now who has the technology, they love it so much. It's such an important part of their life. We are getting that feeling you get from another person. And like was said, it's going to start understanding like our inner soul and conscious better than humans do someday.
So what do you think happened to Siri? You fell out of love with it.
Well, here's what happened. When Apple bought Siri, I would say, what are the 5 largest lakes in California? And here's what upset me. It would come up with all these lakefront property sellers. And when I'd say prime numbers, I'd get all the prime rib places. And I said, what went wrong? And it should have understood from those words I used. And so I wanted to get back in correction. It'll get corrected.
I suspect what's happening.
It's very good. It's very good. It's the best thing out there. But there are some disappointments when you say natural human things, and it doesn't even understand a word like Churchill. Sorry, Ford. Yeah, but you might say, and it won't understand what you're really speaking of from the context of your flow.
Well, I suspect what's happening there is that they acquired Siri in order to start building up a database of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to get a bigger and bigger base, which meant, in some ways, sidestepping Wolfram Alpha for now, but also acquiring this level of knowledge that perhaps can lead to better language processing down the line. I mean, is Nuance doing something like that as well? Certainly Google was with 411. You get thousands and millions of people to talk, and you learn lots of ways they talk. You get a corpus of knowledge, kind of the voice equivalent of crawling the web to find out a lot of different ways things are expressed. And I think that's kind of the stage we're at now in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the accumulation, one of the enabling technological advances that has made more accurate speech recognition possible and is beginning to make more accurate understanding of intent possible is the ability to accumulate large amounts of data from lots of user experience and then to kind of sift it and organize it and build models from it and so forth to kind of anticipate a little bit more what people are likely to do or what people are likely to want.
Do you think one of the unintended consequences of that will change interfaces as well? You know, we'll move away from the desktop model. we'll move into different types of interfaces.
Well, there's no question about that. So, I mean, what Steve described is what the growing instances of what I call speechable moments. Is it, you know, it occurs to you as an individual to just try saying something.
You speak something, but you don't necessarily intend it to be a computer command. When I got my Newton message pad, the first day I had it, I was in an airport with my kids flying to Orlando, and I got a phone call, and I wrote a message on a little notepad. Just wrote a message, Sarah, dentist, 2 p.m. Thursday. That's all I wrote. Didn't intend it. And I saw a button called Assist, and I tapped Assist. It opened up the calendar. It put it in Thursday at 2 p.m., Sarah out of my contact list, and the title was dentist. Oh my God. I didn't intend it for a calendar command. I didn't have to think. I didn't have to work. And everything we build in technology should save us from memorizing and thinking things. I mean, we used to build RPN calculators at Hewlett-Packard, and out came Texas Instruments with arithmetic expressions, parentheses, and things. And the funny thing is, our RPN made you keep all sorts of things in your head trying to remember what was on stacks and all. And the arithmetic calculator was actually the natural way that we had learned all our lives to write things. So it was better, and you should always sense when things are easier, you should move in that direction. It's actually why I wear a very unusual watch, because I can tell in my head, my brain is doing less hard thinking work to read the time on this watch than any watch I've ever had before.
Don't worry, God gave you enough cycles. You're fine.
But you just want things that, you know, you almost don't have to get into, I know how to use it.
Right.
I say something just that I would say to another person, and it somehow understood it.
But Sharon, when you're building a car, like, I assume the voice interaction really would be limited to hands-free phone calls, maybe some GPS interaction. Are there other areas where you think voice will come into the car?
It already has. I mean, but you have to consider the context in which this technology has evolved in the car. So we all have these digital devices, and when Steve and other innovators are thinking about how we use it, they think we have both hands dedicated to the screen, that our eyes are glued here, that we're not doing anything else, and that if we want to talk, we can hold this right up to our hand. But that doesn't work so well when you're in a highway driving with one hand on the wheel going 70 miles an hour.
Hey, everybody on 280 does it fine.
And so when you take the complexity of operating a device like this, you have to amplify it exponentially when you think about how people want to operate it when they're behind the wheel of a vehicle. And that's not something that Ford offered up. That's a response to the market demand. The market is such that consumers are saying, I have a certain amount of connectivity between home and office or school, and I expect to have it seamlessly even when I'm behind the wheel of a car. And so what we did is we're partnered with Nuance and Microsoft and a lot of other suppliers. The first thing we had to realize is that we're not the experts in phones. We're not the experts in these digital devices. So I remember a time, I've worked for Ford for 16 years, and I remember a very short window of time where we actually imagined that you would have a phone number for home, another phone for office, and a dedicated phone for your car. Like, oh, call me up in my car. It's just not practical. And so our strategy has been to partner with those who lead in that space and say, what do we need to do? And our system is an open architecture infrastructure where it's designed to receive new technology and make it compatible with the vehicle. And our hope is to do everything through a Bluetooth technology that enables the device that's otherwise handheld to become hands-free, voice-activated.
At which point the car becomes a connected device to the cloud.
And which is really critical for cars. I mean, if you look at the landscape of the auto industry today, there was a time when the car was cherished and held up as the iconic status symbol. But young people today, fewer and fewer of them are getting their driver's license. And if you ask them, would you rather be behind the wheel of an automobile or behind the wheel of your iPhone? They're going to take the phone all day long. Yeah. But we're trying to create an intersection where those come together. And so the car has to do much more than just transport you. And so now it's almost in its own way become a productivity capsule. And all of these devices that you bring in enable that. When you look at the commute time, in a place like Beijing, the average daily commute is 5 hours a day. I mean, 5 hours of downtime. Imagine not being able to connect, not being able to produce something, not to be able to engage or do anything meaningful. This is a device that allows that. And so it goes well beyond making phone calls. It can pull up music. Even an MP3 player can be packed in your gym bag, in your trunk. And as long as it's Bluetooth and paired, you can say, play genre, play playlist, play this song, play this artist.
Voice becomes this means to this perpetual connection we were talking about before.
But it's not just about these devices.
You know, it's also going to talk, sorry, finish your thought.
Well, it's changing the way you interact with the car. I can change the climate of the control the temperature of my car through voice activation. I can have it read incoming text messages. I can have it change the radio station. I can have it pull down a weather report.
All that's in the realm of what's expected, though. It's really sort of transitioning things that are now onto a new level. And fundamentally, when you get into these kind of areas, there are unintended consequences, there are new practices, there are new businesses that are created as well. And I was wondering, I said to Dan, you know, at what point do these devices start talking back to us as well as part of the interface? You know, mobile advertising could be voices coming at you as well. Why is mobile ads like things you click on? It's not working for anybody. Are we going to get to a stage where ads are talking to us as well?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, and I'm not advocating it necessarily. But
you know,
I'm
pop up on your
kowtowing-
phone,
well,
not mine.
Right. No, I'm kowtowing to the inevitable, and you know, we're at a point where Apple's the most valuable corporation in the world.
About 10 a.m. this morning, yeah.
And just an amazing story. But the business reporters always paired it with the Facebook story, and the Facebook story was that they haven't figured out how their revenue model and their need to just get more and more revenue is going to translate over to the growth of people accessing Facebook over the phone.
Right.
And I would say that you know, if anything's going to drive it, there's going to be the recognition that interactive ads on smartphones will incorporate some form of, it'll sound like your old transistor radio, I suppose, but the idea of understanding your location, understanding your context, understanding what your friends are doing, whatever, is some of the grist for having better, more relevant ads. There's the creepiness factor and all that that you have to sort of overcome.
Well, it's, you know, the classic case is it's creepy because, like, we're old and it's new. You know?
I don't think it's creepy,
If it's convenient, people will use it.
Well, I don't think it's creepy. I think there has to be an underlying value proposition. We are surrounded and inundated by marketing messages, and so if you want my attention as a consumer, as an individual, you better be prepared to entertain, educate, or inform me. And if you can't deliver that, then it becomes a nuance. There has to be something. So whether it's an ad that I click on, or that comes in, streams in through voice, you have to give me something for my attention.
Right.
I have to be rewarded for that.
Do you want to jump in? Sorry.
Sorry.
No. I'm answering. I was just going to comment on, like, a lot of my friends turned off Apple iAds. I don't want iAds getting my location. Well, heck, I'd rather have information. If I'm going to get ads, I'd rather they be relevant to where I am and what I want.
This
and
is
who
the
I am.
crux, yeah.
And we've sort of given up that kind of privacy anyway.
And let's think about where we are with Siri, such as it is, that in the cloud, well, on the device or in the cloud is some form of accurate speech recognition, and that's just the beginning of capturing something your utterances.
Sure.
And then in the cloud is some natural language processing that could potentially get to intent. There's artificial intelligence and hooks into things on the back end that get to how you will carry out commerce. And you have sort of, you know, the natural, you're moving in some natural way to responding to what the machine thinks a person wants to do. And then you get to the original intent of advertising, which some could argue is just providing leading information that ultimately leads to a transaction, but is informed by all this information and metadata about individuals. And we have a lot of the pieces for
Ron,
something.
you wanted to say?
So I actually wanted to leave the advertising world behind.
Never going to happen.
Yeah, well, I try. No, but I want to kind of back up to some of the comments that you made about the way the phone or whatever the device is used in the car. And I want to abstract away from that because this communicator is really kind of a universal interface to all sorts of devices. So the car is just one example right now. I would love to be able to talk to my thermostat. I mean, there must be...
Exhibit A really is the television.
The television.
The remotes are so
television,
broken at this point.
The television, all the there are lots of complicated devices that you have in your house that you don't actually know how to use. They have all this capability and functionality, and maybe you did it once, or maybe you tried to, if you're the IT person in the house, maybe it's your job to figure it out and so forth. But again, it goes back to my point that the complexity is what undermines the available functionality. And having that kind of universal communicator with interfaces to the car, interfaces to the thermostat, the television, and so forth. I mean, to me, that's, and for some of the things, like if I'm interfacing to the thermostat, I don't expect an ad to pop up. I mean, I don't want to buy what the thermostat wants to sell me.
When I'm sitting in my kitchen and when I'm sitting in my house and I say, that's really hot, what's going to react? The thermostat, the oven, my wife's shoes?
Well, that's the problem of ambiguity and figuring out intent. I mean, kind of an example of ambiguity and the role of context in disambiguating, which is going to be crucial for these things to be useful, is, we had, the buffet here with chicken in it and so forth. And if the waiter had gotten up and said the chicken is ready to eat, we would have immediately known that the chicken is cooked, it's displayed, it's ready to go and get it. If we were in a barnyard scenario, we would say, oh, well, we better get some bird feed or whatever they eat, and start spreading it around. But the context that we all share is what lets us disambiguate and get the right intent from even a very simple kind of statement like that.
Do you think that's all going to get... Sorry, go ahead.
But you described the universal communicator with sort of tentacles that are...
Interfaces. We don't call them tentacles. That's,
Okay.
Although there was
Trying
a thing
to
in the
make you
paper,
less
do you see-
creepy. It's a good idea.
There's the soft robot that DARPA, there's some DARPA project for the soft robot, make it, looks like an octopus or something.
Right.
Is that what you're thinking of?
It's more or less.
All the sea
I'll say
monster
yes.
metaphors are
Right.
going
See,
away.
you're
Slimy,
just
slimy.
trying to get something slimy and persistent.
Friendly.
Friendly, persistent. But I remember 5 years ago we were at SRI and a company a research group that eventually became Promptu was developing a single-use sort of device that was going to be around controlling the TV. and that has a specific set of problems in context. And there's sort of this tension that you can't create a universal recognizer because context is so important. So that's to be something in the front end.
You have to identify the context. That's part of the problem.
Right.
So all these things are hard.
Yes.
But we're talking about the future.
We're talking
And
about
in
a lot
the
of, and
future-
there's just
and
a
in
lot
the
of,
future-
there's a lot of brute force computing that's been thrown out there, and it's made an
Yeah.
enormous difference. And we've proceeded so quickly. Sorry.
Well, there are things that are changing. I mean, for instance, if you look at the design of that automobile over there, some of it's inspired by cell phone technology or computer technology. One of the things we added to the steering wheel a couple years ago was the 5-button radial dial that had become so ubiquitous from Apple. So it's an up, down, right, left arrow with an OK button in the middle. So that we know that the users are very comfortable with that with their cell phones, and so we put it on the steering wheel so that they're operating other features. Mm-hmm. We have tablet technology that's clearly taken from the computer industry. And so what's interesting is that not only do you have a collapsing of this convergence of technologies, but it's changing the nature of competition among industry. I mean, Google's making a car. Who would have thought? It's so when you get into the future, it's not going to. The set of competitors, the set of inspiration, all of those things are going to come from a much more varied source than we've ever seen in the past.
So the question there is, who's going to see those ads?
Let's get off the ads.
They'll find a way.
Was just me.
Well, people love it. We're going to go to questions in just a few minutes, so people will be going with microphones. Raise your hand if you want them.
On the subject of this transition from Detroit to Silicon Valley, well, Detroit lost 1 million people, so San Jose is now the 10th largest city.
Mm-hmm. Cleveland contributed.
Thank you,
Well,
Detroit.
Ford actually just opened an office in Silicon Valley because we recognize that this is the hub of innovation. If it's not new in terms of our partnership, but if we want to be here, we recognize we need to be part of the daily dialogue. And so I have my colleagues right here that are populating that office, and it's a whole new way of doing business. Before, though, we go to the open question, I would like to talk about something that we touched on when we did our pre-meeting. And I talked about how voice technology is engendering a sense of intimacy with technology, which is kind of a smoke and mirrors. I think you called it slightly, but it's an illusion. It's an illusion. And I'm very intrigued by what that means from a societal standpoint, what that means when you feel an intimacy, a relationship, a love with these devices. Sherry Turkle from MIT Media's Lab has done some really interesting work, and she, being a pioneer of all the benefits that the internet and all of this would do for us, is taking a completely different turn that says, you know, this technology, we use it as a device to escape loneliness. I mean, she lists several different things, but one of the most provocative hypotheses she has is that technology is a device that we use to escape loneliness. I mean, how many of us have walked into a room, we don't see anyone we know, so we pull out our phone to see if anyone's texted us, if I have an email, did I miss a call, so I don't have to engage with the people around me.
Well, one of the things she touches on in that book is that these things are engineered to kind of trick us into feeling understood.
Exactly.
And we don't go through the authentic human difficulty of really being understood. And that difficulty is the source of meaning. We kind of have to set up for that.
But that'll happen someday.
Well, it happens someday, but the other part of her premise that I find intriguing is that if we as a society are never comfortable with loneliness, what happens to quiet introspection, the thought, the creativity, the innovation that happens in that quiet space? Is technology invading this space in such a way that we're short-circuiting ourselves of those opportunities?
Well, as good as
I
the
don't
tech,
really think so.
I mean, you're getting into a
I think the person who likes to go into those quiet spaces of their own and think things out, whether they're falling asleep, dreaming, whatever. I think they still do that and find the time, even away from the technology. It's not 100. You don't have to be 100% introspection.
Well, you're underlining a fundamental truth, which is no matter what happens to the technology, it's still incumbent on us to be good, and we have to be mindful of that reality. But that's true of whatever we do with technology. But before we go to the questions, I started in this direction. I want to finish in that direction. I'll start with you, Steve. If someone was looking to do something in this area, be it developing cloud, working on UI, some other kind of startup, what would you point them to? What would you think would be a really interesting thing to do in this field that would be meaningful and disruptive that isn't being attacked in the right way now?
Well, one thing is we're going to. I spoke earlier about the senses that we have in our little products now that are going to become my best friend that knows my heart and soul, my thinking, my ways, what jokes I like better than any other human. It's got to have that eye in use. It's got to watch our face and know our expression, because a lot of the meaning that we put into our words comes about from the face expression, or I can talk with my hands, that kind of thing. Eventually, I think smell is going to be very important eventually. So we're on a track. I also think that, looking at how, well, Siri and some other applications and platforms work for me, often it doesn't quite seem to have understood what I meant. It got some words, but it put the wrong meaning to them. And that's got to, a lot of people got to work. It's very, very complicated to understand written language and, what's really meant.
Actually, if you think of smell as pheromones,
and we're talking artificial, we're talking artificial intelligence, but I think we've got to move more and more towards the device in my pocket being a human being, my best friend someday. The trouble is, we're creating it for ourselves to help ourselves, and we can't get rid of it. We created the internet. Could you cut off the internet? No. We created every machine that makes all of our products. Everything you're wearing and everything you have in life, we could never cut off the machines, because then companies would go out of business and we wouldn't have the life we're used to.
So, Dan, what do you think is the opportunity?
Sounds like the new series on ABC where all the power goes out and all you have is a bow and arrow. But
But I did go once 3 weeks with no phone and no computer on a cruise.
And I'm sure you became introspective.
And I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel alone, actually.
You get to know yourself. Well, I couldn't let this go by. So security becomes very, very interesting as you're carrying around so much information on your little buddy here, and we have to acknowledge that. One of the areas we're looking at very closely is voice biometrics, and the fact that not only is what you say need to be understood, but you yourself as a unique individual has a unique voice. and that translates into a way to secure the things that you are accessing through the device that you're talking to. So there's a lot of work going into a natural user interface that where you can wake up the phone hands-free and be recognized as the person with the entitlements behind it to do the things that only you are entitled to do. And voice is perfect for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, I kind of come from the technology side, and so I think the real opportunity is in closing the gap between the speech and the intent, the understanding, and dealing with context, dealing with information in an integrated way. There's information about who you are, who you're talking to, if it's, by who I mean device or information source, whatever it is, the situation that you're in, and all the information resources and device resources that are around you, the context. So the real challenge and the real opportunity, I think, is in kind of integrating all those aspects that will really let this device create the illusion, I'll use that term again, that it really does understand you, because in every way possible, it behaves as if it does.
And do you think that'll take place by a whole lot of compute in the cloud that's very cleverly hooked up to a few processes in the client that seem like they're anticipating while this back end is going on?
I think that's going to change over time. I mean, you know, partly, I mean, we've seen these cycles. You know, we had you know, mainframes, and we had time sharing, and then we had personal computing, and now we're going back to the cloud, which is kind of a different kind of, you know, server kind of time. So I think that, again, as the technology, the actual computer technology continues to get cheaper, that more things, and particularly the things that you really care to maintain as yours and are private, that they'll maybe move back down towards the device. So there'll be kind of a, over time, I think, shifting of things back and forth, so that, you know, obviously if you need to get at information sources, you have to go to the cloud. But if you're talking to devices in your local environment, your car, whatever it is, then there's no need to go out to the cloud, and you don't want to be, you know, in the forest someplace where the cloud isn't available, and all of a sudden you can't turn on the music in your car.
Photon processors, man.
Well, the cloud is almost essential to some things because it has the information of the world. You know, as many nodes as we have neurons in the brain, order of magnitude, as many network connections as we have synapses, and that's why, you know, you don't ask a smart person questions anymore. You ask Google. Starts with G-O, like God. And so we came back, and we didn't design the internet to be a part of the brain, but it has replaced a part of the brain. These things come about by accident. So the size of the internet really gets you to better understanding of what the word was asking about. If I say akin, it might mean I mean some senator named Akin instead of the word akin,
right,
because it's this week. It knows
the buzz,
contextually.
yeah.
But there's another problem. I used to drive along in my car, and I like to do a lot of things by voice everywhere in my life I can. And I just pushed a button on my iPhone, and I would say, call Janet, mobile. And it would call her. It was built into the phone. And then we got Siri. And I'd push the button, I'd say, call Janet, mobile. And I'd wait, and I'd wait, and I'd wait. And then a message would come up saying, I'm not on the internet, even though I was, but sometimes I may not be on the internet. So I would like to, the local works, you keep some kind of a mix. I think we really are going to need a lot of the client and the server solutions and
What?
But now you have to explain
And
why,
what are the
why you were dissing the cloud a couple weeks ago, or were quoted as dissing the cloud.
I wasn't. I think there are a lot of problems that I have stumbled into personally. When I get into products real early, I get into
You dissed
products
the
early.
cloud. You said Siri was poop. You're such a hater.
Yeah.
Don't be a
No, Siri's actually.
Come
great.
on, man. Love technology.
Siri's great, but here's the problem. When things don't work and you expect it to, and you did things right as a human, it's very frustrating. And I run into problems with gadgets because I'm sort of an early adopter and really testing things out. And what I run into, sometimes even 3 to 5 years later, the masses are coming into the same sort of occurrences in technology. What they like is what it usually is, not the problems. I'm having one problem after another because of the cloud, because I don't own anything on the cloud. Anything can change instantly. The way things work, a feature can disappear, a product can disappear on the cloud. Good Lord, I even had a Google Calendar disappear on me. Don't ask me how. I didn't do anything wrong.
So
but
you say,
it's a complicated. It's part of a complicated world. It was probably a sync program. But these sort of problems are getting more and more for me every month. That's the problem.
Right.
And I think that the rest of society is going to go through so many problems with the cloud. It doesn't work beautifully like a trusted friend does. And we're going to get there eventually.
But
it's
this
gonna
is the
take a
case
long
of like,
time.
now we're pacing in front of a microwave wondering why it's taking so long, you know? The technology shows up and immediately we're spoiled waiting for the next thing.
I'm talking about the cloud, when you don't have control. When you buy a microwave, it's in your house and it works today, it's going to work tomorrow, and it didn't go and you kept it protected and it doesn't change. It's just like the vacuum cleaner I had 40 years ago, still works. It's in a closet, it's protected. That's what we're losing.
Works as well as it did back then.
But I'm sure that I've signed away anything on the cloud that goes wrong. I have no recourse.
Sheryl, what do you think's the opportunity?
Well, I think Steve mentions is something that we haven't spoken a lot about. And, when this technology works, it's exquisite, and we can't imagine our life without it. But we're not at a point where it delivers exquisiteness 100% of the time. And there's there's a secondary part of this in terms of, I talk about information addiction on one hand. The other hand is information overload. We live paradoxically in a time when information's never been more readily available, but our ability as an individual to determine what's accurate, credible, or reliable has never been more difficult. And so the key word that we talk about within Ford is simplicity. Simple interfaces that kind of support this very complex, sophisticated technology behind it, and how we engage with that technology. Because if it's not useful or accessible when we need it, then it's not delivering any sort of meaningful value for us. And market research talks about, as consumers, when we go to buy something, we tend to buy things because of features and benefits. We're inclined to buy something that has the most features. But the greatest dissatisfier is when those features don't work and we're left. So there's this paradox of buying stuff because it's capable of doing so much and then owning it and being frustrated because you're underutilizing these capabilities that aren't accessible to you. Okay. And so I think it's incumbent on the innovators, the manufacturers, the supply side to make sure that if you're going to put a technology or an innovation out, it has to be intuitive, it has to be streamlined, it has to be simple. Otherwise, you're worse off for having tried.
Right. If you're going to have this level of intimacy, it needs to react on a kind of intimate and consistent level. Let's take questions from the audience. First question. Sir?
George Gilbert, GigaOn Pro. For Steve and Ron, just in terms of moving this conversational user interface forward and who's in a best position to do that, there seems to be it's easy to understand, relatively easy to understand intent and sort of surface nouns and verbs in the context of a simple website or app like OpenTable. But then you also want a set of tasks that work together, like planning a trip. So how do you integrate what a particular app might do or expose and a platform provider or a device maker to make everything work together? How are those handshakes going to happen?
Is that to me?
Yes, it's for Steve and
basically you could think, oh my gosh, I could just write a program and a program does a certain function. Today's world, everything in our life is changing how we live our life. It's almost all by our devices and our apps and our computers, what their capabilities are. But now that we're mobile, all of a sudden, you're mobile. You have your computer everywhere. You're tied in to so many of these functions in life, whether it's, it's restaurant, it's buying something for something else, it's calendars, and how they link all together seamlessly is very important to have that human sense. So I think there's apps in the future. There's going to be businesses developed. A lot of kids want to go out and I want to learn how to write an iPhone iApp, but really, it's better if you can write the iApp and do the server side and then connect it to other things on the internet. other sources of information, and solve larger, bigger problems. Those are going to be the big winners.
How's that going to be done? I mean, just like mechanics, who's going to service those folks and who connects them?
How's it going to be done? Who's going to...
Yeah, who wires all that together? The person doing the app like OpenTable, and then connecting it to the website, and then there's the native piece.
We're actually in an incredible time for new ideas and new thinking about everything in life and how it's done. And I don't know who's going to be disrupted.
I guess
it's being hashed out now in some ways. I mean, the Nuance strategy, as I understand it, is to be a provider to many, whereas Google or Microsoft wants to have a process inherent in their very, very large network of task-fulfilling devices. Which of those is the more effective? That gets worked out in the marketplace over time. I don't know, Ron, you're in a better position to know.
I was going to say, if we kind of separated out the communication understanding part of it from the execution of whatever that communication is, I mean, I think that's sort of a first step. Because language, I mean, the vocabulary may be different and so forth, but language, English is English, and anybody can pretty much express anything that they want, better, worse, in English. And so that's kind of a given. The speech is coming under control. The language interpretation is coming under control, or will. And now the question is, well, how do you interpret the propositions, let's say, or the requests, or whatever it is that you understood? And in fact, a lot of those requests require planning of a complex process that involves lots of different components and so forth. So the question in there is, how can all those things communicate with the central communication device? And you think about either individual interface specifications for certain services that are highly popular and so forth, or you think about standards for interface that map vocabularies into actions in various ways. And it's kind of a little bit like the semantic web, which had this kind of chicken and egg problem for many, many years. Like, nobody was going to bother to produce these annotations unless there were apps that would actually make use of them. And it was not worthwhile making an app if in fact there was no data that you could operate on. And somehow that kind of eventually opened up, and it's now getting to be, actually pretty viable. All these things are kind of happening. And it takes a while, but I think the first thing is to kind of see the communication as something that you don't want to get infected or contaminated by lots of special purpose things, because the communication is actually a general human kind of component.
Of course, we're trying to get down to what do you mean? Natural language understanding, and it's the same words, the same phrases have different meanings, different times depending on the context.
Well, that was my chicken example.
Apple has a programming language, AppleScript, which sort of solves it, in which you're directing your statements to one program at a time. It understands its own vocabulary that makes sense in its world. And that way you have no one single definition of language.
But now you're talking about a number of different companies and stakeholders, so a series of permissions would have to be granted.
Right. So I think one thing that we haven't talked about in all of this, we've been acting as if the system, the device, had to actually always understand correctly. And I said before, it doesn't have to be perfect to be useful and so forth. But there's another aspect of these interactions that has to also be dead simple, which is, how do you repair a misunderstanding? That's part of the dialogue. So if the wrong thing is about to happen, or you notice that it happens, how easy is it to tell the device, no, that's not what I meant. I meant the thermostat, or whatever it is. And that has to be part of the equation.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Krishnaram Kentapati from Microsoft Research. This is a question broadly for the panelists. I think I heard Sheryl mention that it's great to have very simple, intuitive interfaces behind that can hide, say, very complex technologies, right? So voice is unique in the sense that it can transcend barriers of literacy or language, unlike text. So my question is, what do you see as the future potential, or where do you see voice as an interface for people from, say, people who don't have literacy or who don't understand languages like English and so forth.
I love that. Can I tweak it a little and say, does this create something like a post-literate world? And is that an issue?
Well, within Ford, what we're doing is flattening our language. So we used to have a decision tree. So if we wanted to do something like, if you wanted to engage sync and have it play something off your MP3 player, you'd have to go through a series of things about music, art, genre, artist, song, whatever. But now we just flatten it out. This is play this song. Or I think a better example is what we're doing with navigation. Now, if any of you have navigation, it's really counterintuitive. They ask you to start with the city, and then to go to the state, and then give the street number. And so it took a lot of engineering and programming, but we're now able to say 123 Main Street, Royal Oak. And so the system has now been designed to accept the information whichever way you tell it. But it is, and one of the things as a non-engineer, I think, is that it's the illusion that the technology is getting smarter, but it's just that the programming has become more sophisticated to encompass all the possibilities of the way that this message, the possible ways that an intent might be expressed.
Yeah, thank you, Sheryl, for pointing out an example where we want to get away from that structure, city, state. This hierarchical structure and things is not really how we speak. We just speak an address. Yeah. That's how I choose my nav device.
But let me get back to his question a little bit. I had a great project over the past couple of months of looking at all the providers of simultaneous translation, where you talk and ideally it guesses what language you're talking, and you might have like a destination language that you want it translated to.
Unless you're Scottish.
Well, and there are funny things on YouTube about Scottish speech recognition, right? Yeah. So, right, and we get to the unlikelihood of it happening in our lifetime, going along the vectors that it's going along at this time, and we raise. But let me synthesize a little bit about what Ron was saying. That right now, a bunch of this stuff just doesn't work as we would like it to work intuitively, and may not work at all, but we need that review cycle. And this happens, even if you know the language pairs you're matching, and you have, you're not even using voice, you're just throwing text to text like Google did for a long time. There's no guarantee that, and here's a fun exercise, that if you translate something from English to Spanish and then back to English again, that it's going to resemble what you put in the first place. So what we're finding right now is, if you're going to design a product, you're going to assume that what you get back is, or what is being recognized and transcribed essentially, is imperfect. And in some ways you can fudge that if you can impute intent or understand the context and do something as if it were a command. But if it's a translation, you want to send it to some review board, the human cleanup crew or something. And that's where we're at right now, as best as I can tell.
The machines are just going to get better programmed to cover up and simulate intelligence.
Agreed.
And eventually they'll just have full intelligence and conscious, long ways off.
Ron,
I think you have to be careful because we see a lot of tech or engineering speak making its way into the marketplace. So think of the number of appliances that you have that instead of saying on off, they say cancel. Cancel is not intuitive. That's an engineer's term, So my dishwasher says cancel when I want it to turn off, And so I think that it's the consumer is getting smarter, but we also have to be wary of, that sort of technical speak becoming commonplace in the marketplace.
Ron, is there something you want to add about the
No.
literacy? Well, I think one thing that should be said in terms of literacy and voice is that it is a reality that literate people tend to be more affluent. And so there's a kind of market reality in here that either you could create a much bigger market by bringing in cultures that are, not cultures, but people who are not literate, but it's going to have to be very cheap to do that, or else you're going to have some way of gaining a little bit of money at a huge scale in order to put in that time and effort. Next question.
Hi, I'm AJ. I started Speak With Me. We were based off of a decade of research at Carnegie Mellon, funded by DARPA and Bosch. We are, in many ways, a direct competitor to Siri, although we can also have online, offline switching mode dialogue system. Something Woz mentioned was useful. So Woz, 30 years ago, you mentioned that the GUI slowed you down from the command line. One of the theses that we designed our product with is that a voice user interface needs to be faster than the command line. So what's your take on latency and the fact that Siri could take up to 45 seconds while you're driving 80 miles an hour on the highway to get back to you,
Easy.
being a problem with respect to these
I never
systems?
felt that the GUI was slower than the command line because it was doing more powerful things. What it would have taken to do those things from the command line, I felt it was faster, even if I did have some what appeared to be slowdowns trying to get tasks done. So, and what was the second part? But I feel the same way.
The latency issues with the online dialogue
latency.
systems.
Yeah, you don't want to speak and then, well, it goes out to, I guess, the Apple and Google supercomputers, and the voice comes back real quickly. If you're on 4G, it's got your words so accurate. I'm really impressed at how that technology has come through over all these years. I don't expect it to take longer times to speak. Speaking seems to be like almost the fastest way. When I had my Newton message pad, I would handwrite. Call, C-A-L-L, Jim, J-I-M. And it would go beep, 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 beep into the phone and never make a mistake. My brain felt like it was doing it the comfortable human way. And yeah, it took longer than just going over the phone and dialing a number that I memorized. But we shouldn't make ourselves have to, we should forget memorizing things when these devices can do it for us. And so natural speech is like that. It's just like, it feels so comfortable. I can't ever feel that it's slowing me down. And even if it is, if I'm more comfortable, that's better. Even if I'm slow. I'm nice and relaxed and peaceful. I'm not a super anxious person.
And what's your desire for the system to work when you're, say, in a room like this where you have one bar or no reception?
That's where I want it to work locally, just like yours. You say yours does. I got to find out what yours is. But also, in a room like this, what if I were speaking to the television over there? Would it be able to really hear me unless the microphone's close to my mouth? That's what I want to know. The cars impress me about how they do.
If you have a multi-element array mic, you can make the TV do that.
Good.
Next question.
Good. You understand me. A machine should.
Yeah, well, first I'd like to say that my whole day has been made by hearing Steve say, I'm kind of an early adopter, so maybe it's just me. But I'd like to move into the philosophical material. All of the interface modalities we've been talking about, things like command lines and GUI and mice, are metaphorical in a way that speech isn't. I mean, that's the one interface that we all have already. It's not a metaphor at all. Our relationship to the interface may be a metaphor, but the interaction itself isn't. I wonder what you think the implications of that are.
Well, we have it now, but young kids learn all these little abbreviations on their texting, that little letters and numbers and things. So I wonder how they're going to do when. Are they learning speech as well as we did? Are they learning the necessity for good? Some people think communication is good grammar and following good lessons of that. And I don't know if it's going to be as important in the future.
Well, from a futuring standpoint, we already see evidence of it. My children are elementary school aged, and their teachers actually have to tell them when they take an exam, no text abbreviation is allowed. I can remember a Disney show that was called Phil of the Future, and they have a setup and such where the boy who's time transported from the 2050 to modern times is called to task because he can't handwrite, and he said, "Oh, nobody handwrites in the future." Well, and state. If you look across the country, there are a number of states that have stopped teaching cursive writing. They don't. So I think the implications are extraordinary. How people communicate and face-to-face communication, and our ability to recognize what person. I think they say 90% of all communication is nonverbal. So if we're engaging with technology, where does that other 90% go?
I think you make a really interesting point there, though, that because it is so immediate, it's the breath from my body going to this machine, it raises the stakes for the machine as well. And I think when Siri makes a mistake, you take it more personally than you would a search failure because of the way it was originated.
No, it's absolutely true. And we do a lot of work in contact centers, And people forgive other people from not recognizing what they're asking for a lot more than they would IVR, interactive voice response.
Ironically, when you're dealing with a voice activation in a car, people, when it doesn't give you what it wants, they tend to yell. And it only makes it harder for the system to understand what you're saying. Right. And then after they're done yelling, they start talking to it very slowly, like it's simple-minded, which is also disrupting the context in which the technology thrives.
And when you call up an office, when you call up an office and you get the robot that wants you to respond and tell you what to do, how many people start feeling good about what's about to happen?
Well, I think that's an important issue, because if you felt that it just misunderstood for a moment, and if you helped it understand what you truly meant, it would actually go ahead and solve your problem.
Right.
But we don't have that confidence. We take this first mistake as an indication that, boy, are we in for it here.
Yeah.
So this may be, a
so
transitional
it's a UI issue
point.
In a sense.
It's a capability issue and where we are with all these technologies and so forth, but not necessarily where we're going to be. And if, in fact, the system does give us reason to have confidence that we'll eventually get to whatever it is that we want to do,
right.
Then we'll probably be, just like with a person, we'll probably be willing to forgive it a few mistakes along the way. Mm-hmm. But right now it's like, boy, I know the way I know about you.
Right.
You make a mistake like that, the game is up.
Right. Question? Over here.
Hi, I would like to, my name is Moises Goldschmidt, I'm from Microsoft Research, and I would like to go back to the intimacy factor. And something that has been a bit missing, I would like you to speculate a lot, is about prosody and feeling. I mean, perhaps context, my frustration and not be able to ask the question when I wanted to ask in the middle to steer the conversation, my frustration with the device, instead of yelling at it, or once I start yelling, if the device understands, hey, I see you're frustrated, let me try. So it goes back to the multimodality of what's needed. I mean, we have cameras in the phone. I mean, look at my gestures, at my eyebrows, how I move my head. So how far are we from representing my emotional state and recognizing my emotional state through the tone of my voice and, my singing? And it's to everybody involved in the panel.
It's so complex, it's hard to say. How far away is perfection? Perfection being defined as good as a person could do. And, Ray Kurzweil says 40 years.
Right.
Well,
he always says
we're going to live forever. Once we live.
He said 4 years for 20 years.
But I mean, to his question,
No,
we're already seeing speech analytics emerging as a very, very important area and one that's getting a bunch of investment. And a lot of speech analytics has been getting into emotion detection, not in real time. So, and once again, I'm quoting context center sort of technologies, but they'll go through stored voice files and they'll detect higher pitch, they'll detect whatever, and it's not an exact science.
Does Ford know when we're falling asleep?
There is some drowsy driver detection, but more specifically to your point, my understanding about emotionally aware technology that recognizes your voice exists. I believe NASA has some things, in terms of when astronauts are engaging with technology, that the device is able to read their emotional state to determine how best to answer their question. I think there's a question of scale and cost.
I think this is one of the most disastrous UI propositions I've ever heard. Nothing will piss you off as much as being told you're pissed off.
Exactly. Well, and because some people respond differently. Some people respond to tough love and other people respond to coddling. What if the computer makes the wrong call?
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
You're driving across Florida with your diaper on. And you're
God damn it, I'm not mad! It'd be like that.
If we create the technology, if we aren't treated by the technology as though we are gods and serve perfectly, we're upset. We will do things to inanimate objects we'll never do to a human being. I mean, I learned this in college when I made TVs misbehave in the dorm. They would pound that, they would hit that TV so hard.
Rage against the machine, I suppose you call it.
But I think the biggest context to remember is that this stuff is still in its infancy. You know, that the proliferation of cell phones is only a decade old.
Yeah.
You know, the iPhone, the Siri, you know, those are new entrants into the marketplace. So we're just scratching the surface of what they're capable of doing.
We also find out as the compute increases just how much harder the challenge is. You know, the complexities of what communication are become manifest as we start to explore this stuff.
Well, Steve said something that I think is interesting, because I think that the future luxury would be those who can afford to disconnect.
Well, let Ron jump in, because I think he wanted to.
I was just going to say that I think there is, you know, it's like a Ray Kurzweil kind of thing. There is this acceleration going on right now. And in part it is the Siri effect. I mean, people are talking, you know, it's just generating an enormous amount of investment in lots of different companies and places and universities and so forth, because the image of what may be possible is there for everybody to see. I don't know if you like the Scorsese interview or not, but you know, it's like, really, you could do, you know.
That creates a reality.
And that creates a reality, and that's creating a lot of investment. So I think if we were to project the development history of the last 10 years into the next 5 years even, I think we would be underestimating all the advances that are going to be made just by the sheer effort that's going on.
We have time for one more question. Karen, it's so tough.
No pressure. Y'all are fantastic. So I have a question for Ron about personalization.
About what?
About personalization. So, and it kind of touches on something we've been talking about, by which I mean you've been talking about throughout the panel, which is that why we love our technology. I love my Pandora station after I've input enough you know, responses to it. Like, it knows what I want before I know what I want. So as the technology develops, to kind of personalize, not just like for the cloud, for the general population, but individuals like prime numbers versus prime rib, how much of that input is going to be integrated into the user interface, and how is that going to show up with the technology? And thank you.
And that's for me.
Yes.
Well, I'd have to say, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's clearly a need, it's clearly an enabler, both for the way you relate to it and for the capabilities that it will provide to you. And the question is, how does it learn your preferences? You know, without, I mean, you could go in and, you know, do all the, you know, pointing and clicking, whatever it is, or tell it. But in fact, in the way you use it and the things that you respond to, I mean, you see a little bit, you know, where they record, you know, the 25 most frequently played songs or something like that. So it's a very, very primitive thing now. But as these devices understand more about what you're doing, then they'll have more data on which to make those inferences. When it will happen, how it will happen, I don't know. But you know, all of this is kind of creating the infrastructure that will enable that to be possible.
There's two sides to that. Pandora is so good at presenting the song you love. I hate it. I will not touch it, because I'll wind up spending all night listening to new songs and ordering them and never get any sleep. It's too good.
Yeah.
That's what they had in mind.
Yeah.
I'm only one person with 24 hours in a day.
I believe that's all we have time for, Karen. Did you want to say a few words? But
Yes, I do. On behalf of all of us here, just want to thank our speakers again for your candor and for sharing your insights and perspectives with us so freely. Really appreciate it. And Quentin,